Marriages are inherently unfair.
Often there's that assumption the wife works, but it's still on her to take care of a lot of things.
I'm Rachel Cottam, and this is the Allies at Work podcast. Here, you'll discover bite-sized tactics that you can implement today to improve gender equity in your workplace, home, and community. In today's episode, you'll hear from Nate Bagley and Danica Holdaway about creating balance in partnership. Nate Bagley is the founder of Growth Marriage and director of marketing at COREnology. Danica Holdaway is a self-identified content Swiss Army knife with experience at several early-stage startups. Today, you'll hear Nate explain how equitable partnerships are based on seeing each other fully and accepting each other's pain. Is the application to workplace allyship already obvious to you? To be better gender allies at work, we have to listen to women's struggles and we have to believe them, even if that means sitting with discomfort, which Nate will model for us beautifully. You'll also hear Danica reflect on how her husband was one of her greatest allies when she transitioned into a full-time tech career. He not only helped her develop stronger ambition and negotiation skills, but he also stepped it up at home. At the end of this episode, I'll share an allyship micro action with you, something you can start doing right away to make your workplace more inclusive. Today's allyship action is one of my favorites: parent out loud. Whether or not you're married, these principles of humanity and trust will help you be a better advocate in every relationship. Thanks for being here. When my kids wake up at night, they call for dad. My husband helps our three littles keep their teeth brushed, and he's gotten really good at Saturday morning French toast. When my kids have a doctor's appointment, they want me. I help them clean and organize their rooms, and I'm trying to get better at veggies with every meal. My husband and I don't have a perfect marriage, but we are committed to partnership, and that's what allyship is all about. Oftentimes, the gender balance in our homes is reflected in our biases towards women at work. Nate Bagley created a company focused on finding success in romantic partnerships, but he's seen the applications to gender allyship as well. Here's a little bit of Nate's perspective.
So back in 2012, I was single and I was frustrated because I was dating a lot, but none of my relationships were panning out the way I wanted them to. I wanted to get married and have a family. And so I wanted to figure out what it was that I was doing wrong in my relationships that was preventing them from moving to that next step. And I decided I was going to quit my job and travel around the country for a few months and interview couples who were madly in love with each other to try and figure out what they were doing that I was not doing. What is it that they were doing that made their relationship so successful, that made it withstand the test of time, to help them stay in love and stay passionate and stay connected with each other when I could barely get past 6 months dating a girl. I ended up raising like 30 grand on a Kickstarter, and I did that cross-country road trip, and I learned so much. And I started getting introduced to therapists and researchers and authors and experts in the field of marriage and relationships, and realized there's like a whole body of work, a whole bunch of really interesting data and information and theories about what makes relationships last. And I started acting as the bridge between the researchers and the experts and the lay population.
I love that. And I know that you had some like celebrity moments, right? Where you got some pretty famous folks to sit on stage with you.
Yeah. I mean, probably the pinnacle of my professional career is I got to produce an event for doctors John and Julie Gottman, who are like the godfather and godmother of marriage research. And we had over 3,000 people in attendance, and I got to sit on a stage and interview them for about an hour about their life and their research. And it was one of the coolest experiences of my life.
And now happily married?
Now happily married, been married for about eight years, have 2 kids and an amazing wife who I couldn't be more happy and grateful to be married to her.
So all of that culminating in Nate today. What does Nate today have to say about how those partnership relationships factor into gender equity, whether that's at home or in the workplace?
The first thing that comes to mind is a Dr. John Gottman quote. And he says if he could summarize his 40 years of marriage research into 2 sentences, it's, baby, when you're hurting, the world stops and I listen. And one of the things I love about that is he doesn't qualify like whose problems or whose priorities are more important. It's like, regardless of your pain and what causes it, if you're in an equitable relationship, that pain matters. And so there's something special about just acknowledging in your relationship that, like, maybe one of the core reasons we're together, like an optimal relationship, is that we want life to be mutually enjoyable, maximally mutually enjoyable. And so if you're experiencing pain, if you're experiencing discomfort, a letdown, a disappointment, whether it's a professional or a personal, whether it's relational with a friend or a family member, it doesn't matter. What matters is that your pain is important to me. And I think that's a really beautiful foundation to build on. And I think
Yeah.
that when you translate that over into the corporate world, that matters too. We experience a lot of pains and disappointments. And on the flip side, a lot of victories and a lot of great experiences. And we need to have space for all types of experiences. And we need to have understanding and empathy for all types of pain and disappointment and inconveniences and frustrations. I'm coming off of like 3 straight weeks of having sick kids. And nothing gives me more anxiety than going to bed at night knowing that my kid has like 102-degree fever.
Yeah.
And wanting their well-being. And I know that my wife shares that worry and that desire. And so understanding that, there are days when my wife has to go into work, she's a nurse, and having flexibility for me to be home with the kids is really important. And there are days on the flip side where my wife isn't working and she's the primary caregiver, and we have to hand that off back and forth based off of the needs of our family. And I think we live in a day and in an age where that's more possible than ever.
Yeah. I know you're coming off of a recent job search. Do
Yeah,
you think that flexibility and ability to lean in as a parent was a pretty pivotal deciding factor for which job you would take?
absolutely. I want to live a values-driven life. And a company that prohibits me from living my values is not a company that I want to work for. And I realize that we don't live in a utopia. And so, there's limitations to everything. I want to be realistic about what I say here, but you want to work for someone and with people who share your values. And like, we have a guy in our office who he lives farther away and he doesn't want to sit in traffic during rush hour because that commute is wretched. So he comes in a couple hours early and he leaves a couple hours early so he can have some time with his kids during the day and not spend 2 hours in the car every day. And like the whole team rallies around that because we want him to have time with his kids instead of clocking in and clocking out at a set time. And he has a job where that's possible. Working for a company that I know cares about me and my wants, desires, and values as an individual matters.
Mm. How do you think that transfers over to allyship then? And I think you touched on this a little bit at first, just seeing people's pain, believing their stories, holding space for whatever their individual experience is. I know that Brene Brown has said that she kind of actually refuted her previous belief that you could read emotions in other people. She said instead of like trying to put her lens on the single Latina mother who is crying in the stairwell and saying, "Oh, I know what you're feeling," she gets to just ask and then believe her story. And so I think you touched on that a lot. That's one way that you can really be an ally for women in the workplace. What else do you see men do really well, whether it's in a corporate space or in those marriage relationships, to be better allies for women?
Today, more than ever, every family looks different. Like the gender roles within society are so up in the air, and it's up for every couple to navigate and make choices based on what's right for their family. And I think as far as advocacy goes, it's being able to show up to work and talk about my daughter's dance class that she went to. It's being able to take a little bit of time off to go have a daddy-daughter date and be able to talk about that. That's why you're taking time off. It's saying, hey, I'm coming late today because I'm taking my kids to the doctor's office because they're not feeling well. Or I need to work from home today so I can take care of the kids who may not be feeling well, like I had to do this week. I think allyship is kicking out this idea of traditional gender roles and just admitting that those of us who have children, we're all parents. Those of us who have partners, we're all partners. We all have responsibilities to each other, and those responsibilities aren't universally the same. And allowing space for people to honor their family commitments and their commitments outside of life in the way that aligns most with their values, and just having respect for that without making it all like women's responsibility to do X, Y, and Z and men's responsibility to do A, B, and C. So I think that's one of the coolest things that we have the opportunity to do now that maybe people haven't had as much freedom to do historically, is to get creative about what the roles and responsibilities look like in your family and in your relationships outside of the construct of gender.
I think you're right. It's such a fun, creative time period that we're in, that every family looks different, who the parents are, who the partners are.
Yep.
It
Never
all
in
looks
history
different.
has it been more acceptable for a man to be a stay-at-home father or a woman to be the major breadwinner. Never has it been more socially acceptable for a man to cry or go to dance class or whatever, or a woman to be like really assertive and vie for leadership positions and be really career driven. I think it's more there than it ever has been. And we're trending in the right direction. And the only thing that we can do is continue to make progress by allowing people the freedom to make the decisions that feel best for them and supporting those decisions.
I love that celebration of progress. And like you said, never has it been more socially acceptable. And yet we do still have a lot of work to do. That's why we're having conversations.
Yeah, that doesn't
like
negate
this.
the work that still needs to be done.
I'm all for celebrating progress. The stories Nate shared about prioritizing workplace flexibility and owning our parenting responsibilities are especially meaningful examples of gender allyship. When men talk about their work-life integration, this gives permission to mothers to do the same. However, as we mentioned, there's still a lot to be done. Even today, women carry the brunt of domestic responsibilities in heterosexual couples around 65% of the time. This imbalance plays out in the workplace too. Women get 44% more requests than men to volunteer for non-promotable tasks. Think planning lunches, tidying shared areas, ordering the boss's gift, taking notes in meetings. Because these tasks are often associated with the invisible labor of caregiving, it's more likely that women will be asked to do them. When women do fulfill these tasks, we are then viewed as less strategic employees, and we're less likely to be given opportunities to lead. But if we say no, we're not a team player. It's a lose-lose. One way male allies can counteract this is by stepping up and doing the invisible work themselves, both in the office and at home. Danica will share a little bit about this balance in just a minute, but first, I want you to hear one more story from Nate. After we'd wrapped our conversation, Nate made a casual comment that stopped me in my tracks. He said, "Marriages are inherently unfair." Now, fair can be a triggering word in equity, so instead of getting defensive, I used a phrase that all allies should memorize. I said, "Tell me more." Nate was vulnerable and gracious, and frankly, he didn't arrive at the conclusion I expected.
Marriages are inherently unfair.
Wait, okay, tell me more.
Yeah, like built into marriage is a certain aspect of unfairness. It's impossible to have complete fairness in a relationship because we all bring in our own baggage and our own strengths and weaknesses. I'll give an example. When my youngest daughter was 4 months old, she had a really strong allergic reaction to dairy that we didn't know she had, to the point where I thought I was holding my dying baby in my arms. And I had to call 911, and the paramedics came and rescued her and drove her to the hospital. And it was the worst experience of my life. And then 2 weeks later, they didn't know what had happened to her. 2 weeks later, it happened again. I was alone again with her. I fed her this formula, didn't realize that the first time it happened, that it was an allergic reaction. And then the thing that they said would never happen again happened again. So I have trauma, like real PTSD responses to my youngest daughter throwing up. Whenever she throws up, it takes me right back to that moment. And I feel like my baby is dying in my arms, and I start to shake and I cry, and it's a horrible, horrible experience. Now, my wife loves to exercise. She loves to go to the gym. And sometimes she wants to go to the gym and not take the kids with her and put them in childcare. She wants to leave them with me. But I tend to be really uncomfortable being left alone with my 1-year-old because of those two experiences. I was alone. And it scares me to think of that happening a third time. Because of that experience that I went through, she's like, "It's not fair that you can go to the gym whenever you want and leave the kids with me. But whenever I want to go to the gym and leave the kids with you, it's kind of like a big to-do. And there's this reluctance around it. And I don't have that same freedom." It's an inequity. Like it's not equal. It's not fair. But I can't just make my trauma go away. I can't make this PTSD response go away. And so there are aspects of our relationship that are unfair because I I bring stuff to the table to make it that way. And there are aspects of the relationship that are unfair where she brings stuff to the table and I have to clean up the pieces. She has a higher tolerance for messiness than I do. And so who's always the one who's walking around frustrated, feeling like we're living in a super cluttered house? It's me. But there's nothing wrong with her. She just has a higher tolerance for messiness. Is it fair? No. Do I have to do the dishes way more often than she does? Yes, because I can't tolerate the mess. But that doesn't mean that we can't have an egalitarian relationship where both of our needs are met and we can have meaningful conversations and prioritize what's important to each other and have conversations about our values and help fill in the gaps. Like, it's never going to be 50-50. There's never going to be a relationship where everybody wants the exact same amount of sex at the exact same amount of time, always and forever. There's never going to be a relationship where both partners come in wanting everything organized the exact same way in the exact same system, or who have the exact same views on money. Like, there's always going to be things that we bring into the relationship that make it uncomfortable for the other person. And that's part of navigating a relationship, is just learning that, like, it's not fair. And that's part of the beauty of it, is learning to outgrow the problems that inherently come with being in a relationship. The unfairness is a feature, not a bug. The unfairness is what forces you to grow up and mature and have hard conversations and learn to manage perpetual problems instead of trying to solve problems that don't have a solution. I think when you show up into a relationship thinking that you can just solve problems and reach a destination of equity, you're fooling yourself. It's more, we learn to manage the inequities in our relationship to make it as workable and enjoyable as possible for each other. And that process, that constant balancing act of trying to sacrifice and maintain your boundaries and stand up for what you want, but also what you want and what your partner wants doesn't always align. Like, that's part of the beauty of sharing a life with somebody. So I just don't think that equity is a destination. I think it's a mindset in a lot of ways, where you're just constantly trying to, like, stay curious and navigate any conflicts that arise with empathy and with not just your own self-interest, but the interest of everybody involved in the issue.
And I think you kind of came full circle there, because you talked about being seen in your pain. And I think one way that we can achieve that equity mindset or start on that equity journey is by believing the pain of others, whether it's a partner or a woman in our workplace or somebody who represents a different underestimated group. One example in my marriage that's on a much smaller scale is the weight of making dinner did fall to me for like a decade. And it wasn't something that my husband said, I expect you to make dinner. It was just because it's what we'd seen modeled in both of our families. And finally, a year or two ago, I said, I can't. Like, I am so sick of making dinner. I am bored. I'm thinking about it from the minute I get out of bed. And then I'm stressing about it during my workday. And I need a more equitable version of this. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfectly fair. So we literally sat down and said, okay, these days I'm making dinner. These days Carlin's making dinner. These days we're eating out, or these days we're eating leftovers, and it's fine. And I think if my husband had not believed me in saying, like, that's such a minor inconvenience, like,
right. Just
who cares? Yeah. And just like if your wife dismissed your trauma, that would create a lot of tension, a lot of lack of collaboration, lack of equity. And so I think what you said is just really meaningful. We have to believe each other, and then we have to start on that journey. It's never going to be perfect, but I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, there's another John Gottman quote where he says, the purpose of conflict in marriage is not to solve the problem, it's to create mutual understanding. And, like, you don't need to solve every problem, but at a minimum, you have to at least help the other person feel understood.
Yeah.
They might bring a view to the table that you disagree with. That's great. At least give them the service of hearing them, repeating back to them what you hear them saying, and helping them feel like, okay, my voice was heard. I did my part to raise my voice. And even if they don't go with my plan, at least I feel understood. And, like, that alone is validating in and of itself.
I'm still processing what this story means for allyship, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What I do know is that believing women's stories, creating mutual understanding, and working on your own baggage, these are all things that male allies can do in partnerships and in workplaces to improve gender equity. Gloria Steinem said that once men realize that gender roles are a prison for them too, they become really valuable allies, because they're not just helping someone else, they're freeing themselves. When Danica Holdaway, marketer and mom of 3, was telling me about her career journey, she naturally referred to her husband of over a decade as one of these really strong allies. She called him her hype man. as she was making a transition into a full-time tech role. I asked her to expand on this a little bit.
I do want to go back to something that you said about your husband being an incredible ally, because I think that's something all couples are striving for, is having their world's best cheerleader in their partner. But the fact that your husband is such a strong male ally too, and fighting for you to have opportunities and helping you be aware of your biases and negotiating salary and applying for jobs you might not be qualified for. I just think that's rad. Is there anything more you want to share about that?
Yeah, the thing that I love the most about my husband in this context is he is not one to sugarcoat anything with anyone ever. And there were times where like it almost felt a little too harsh to me when I was dipping the toe to like, should I interview for jobs? And there were times when he would be like, yes, you should go interview for this job. You should take this job. You should. And I was like, why are you pushing me to do this? In times when I felt really inadequate, I was like, no, that's too much. But he was like, no, you can do this. You are absolutely qualified for this. You can absolutely do this. And my husband's been in tech for years. He knew the industry better than I did. And he knew me better than I think I did at that time too. And was just really, really honest about things where he was just like, yes, you are qualified for this. Or yes, you should say this. And and there were times where I'm like, that's too much. I can't ask for that much money, or I can't expect this or that. And even when there was a round of layoffs as COVID hit, and I was so sad because I was like, I'm never going to have an opportunity like this again. I truly felt like lightning struck and it's not going to strike twice. And he was like, that's stupid. There are great jobs just like this out there. You absolutely can find other awesome, fantastic jobs. And I think that abundance mentality is something that I feel like is a weakness, at least for me as a woman. And I know there's other female coworkers I've talked to about this, and this idea that, oh, I'm lucky if I have this job, or I'm lucky if I find something that's flexible with my kids, or I'm lucky if I find something that pays me enough that I can have a nanny or whatever, versus like his attitude where he's like, no, like there are great jobs out there. There's lots of places that are going to be a great fit. And like, I thought like, I am so lucky. I can't let anybody know that I don't actually have the experience to be here, and instead his was such an abundance mentality of like, you are great at what you do. You can learn how to do anything that you don't yet know how to do. And there will always be good jobs out there. And if at any point you are not feeling like this is the right spot for you, you can go find something else that is also incredible and great. And so that was really a game changer for me. It's an ongoing process. We continue to have conversations like this, but being an ally is more than just lending support to your wife that wants to go work. And it's like, yeah, that bar is at ground level, sir. Like the bar needs to be higher, and it needs to be like, I believe in you, I'm encouraging you, and I'm also willing to give you the hard feedback that you may not want all the time, because it did make me better and it did help me have the courage to pursue bigger things. And that we also shoulder those like pick up and drop off, and who's going to go to this and who can take her to gymnastics, and that kind of thing is also really key. And that doesn't always fall under the same job umbrella, but often there's that assumption that like, oh, the wife works, but it's still on her to take care of a lot of things. And obviously it's always an ongoing balancing shuffle, but that's another big part of his allyship too, is just recognizing work isn't one thing that exists in a vacuum. I think that can be a luxury for a lot of men, but I think most women would agree that that's not the reality. Your work does not exist separate from your life. And so a good ally should also be willing to acknowledge where work is going to take from life. It can also add to it, but that means that there's a lot that I can't do because I'm also working. And so he's like, okay, then there's also some work stuff and free time stuff that I won't do because I have to pick up some of that slack in the middle. And so for us, that's been a really great blessing in my life. And I think in his too, that our work lives, we've been able to support each other and then also just more equitably distribute home life responsibilities across the two of us.
I love that so much. And something you made me think of that you hinted at a little bit is also the financial equity that comes when a woman, and particularly a mother, goes back to work. Often there's a financial pressure that the woman can only go back to work if her salary covers the cost of daycare. But in the example that you shared, where you and your husband had this conversation together, Hopefully it wasn't just like, oh, well, Danica, you should go back to work because then your money could pay for a nanny. Hopefully it's a shared responsibility there. We'll get into financial allyship in a later episode because it's a big freaking deal. But what I love about this story from Danica is she shows what happens when allyship starts at home. Because her husband was not limited by notions of traditional gender norms, he was able to support her on a new career trajectory, and she experienced personal and financial growth because of it. And she was able to enrich her company by bringing her unique experience and perspective. Like Nate said, every family looks different, but whether or not you are in a married or partner relationship, you can still impact gender equity at work by practicing allyship at home.
At the end of each episode, I'll share an allyship micro action that you can start using right away. Today's allyship action, parent out loud. Nate shared examples of this tactic already, but let me define it for you. To parent out loud, you must literally speak out loud in the workplace about your parenting responsibilities at home. This gives permission to mothers to do the same without fear of being penalized. Leaving early for parent-teacher conference? Say it out loud. Have a sick kid next to you during a Zoom call? Say it out loud. Using your lunch break to take your daughter to the dentist? Say it out loud. Skipping a networking event because it overlaps with family dinner? You got it. Say it out loud. This sentiment carries over into how you use your calendar or Slack statuses too. Please don't hide your life or make up ambiguous busy meetings. When you do this, it makes such a big difference, especially coming from male allies. This helps mothers feel supported and all team members feel seen. We're human beings, not employees. Parenting out loud helps everyone remember that.
If you don't have kids, you can still be an ally by living out loud. No, that's not some hokey YOLO mantra. I mean that you should literally speak out loud about your life outside of work. If you're hosting an art show, attending your niece's dance recital, or even just taking your dog for a walk, you're already doing these things. Just talk about it. It will make such a difference. Next time.
Something big for me, and I was realizing I don't have to hate my privileges. I can use it to help others.
I don't think you're a true ally unless you're tackling elements of the system.
Learn more, do better.